I have always tried to find middle ground. I'm a middle child, I'm the peacemaker. As a pastor, I always tried to find a middle way to bring people together. As the director now of a senior center, I can't be political, so I'm always looking for the middle ground. I'm with Rodney King. Why can't we all just get along? But that's really hard with the events of our day. And as usual, I'm going to wade in way over my head, sharing with you my growing edge, my bleeding edge, my cutting edge, just kind of where I am in my life and the things that I'm grappling with. These are not seasoned thoughts coming to you. These are, me in the fray. So here we go. um, I've just really struggled with what to do about facing up. Okay, so I've always had to try to take the middle, and do I try to create this space for that's just really wide open and respectful of everyone? Well, yeah, I mean I like the sound of all of that, but there are things that are going on right now that really disturb me. And so, in an effort to sort of be inclusive of everybody, do I just not say anything? Do I just ignore what's going on not just around me, but in here? It's just really clear to me that if I want to claim authenticity, I have to address things as I'm experiencing them. And on this issue of what's happening in our nation right now, I feel like I just have to kind of take sides. It's very clear to me that Trump and his cabinet are seeking to implement Christian nationalism. They are putting into play Project 2025. They want to make America great again, and to them, what that means is to make America white and Christian by any means necessary, by force if necessary, because the ends justifies the means. Because that's what America was, that's what America must become again. I find this line of thought and reasoning deeply disturbing, not Christian at all, and anti-American. Even back when I was a very conservative, I would have found this disturbing. So I've decided that I can't just be safe and silent on this. I have to go on record as being opposed to this. And if that offends you, and if you even say, you know what, this is not the podcast for me, I understand. I mean, like harm or anything like that, but I just have to say where I am on this. The pushback to like saying this is not okay is to say, well, you're just being dogmatic, right? Okay, so the right is being dogmatic about Christian nationalism. You're being dogmatic on the left. And that is a fair criticism. Sometimes there is a dogma on the left. But to push back against dogmatism is not dogmatism. Now, I had lunch with a friend who made me aware of something I really should have known about anyway. Karl Popper wrote a book called The Open Society and Its Enemies. It's a big, long book, which I have not read, but in it, there is a section called The Paradox of Intolerance. I'm sorry, I said that wrong. The Paradox of Tolerance. Actually, you could say that either way, but Popper called it the paradox of tolerance. And the idea of this is simple, and it is that to tolerate intolerance results in an intolerant society. See why you call it a paradox? It's very hard to express this without just getting tied up in, noodles in your head. But the idea is that dogmatic groups will be quick to point out when you say, wait, we can't have dogma here, to say, wait, you're being dogmatic by telling me that I can't be dogmatic. But this idea of tolerance is not exactly dogma. To say that we're not going to tolerate dogma is not the same as trying to force dogma, your dogma, on everyone else. Now, let's just take a step back here. Let me take a step back and remind you of where I'm coming from. My whole grid and all of that, I won't go into it, but I believe that as human beings, our superpower is that we are storytellers. We are storytelling apes. That is what has allowed us to rise to the top and rule the world and all of that. Yuval Noah Harari, in his book Sapiens, describes this power of story so beautifully. He talks about, the story of God, the story of a country, the story of money. He talks about the story of the LLC, the idea that you can create a company that is separate from you and has its own identity, which can be... anyway, there's lots of stories that we tell. And his point is not that this is bad, but just to point out this is undeniably true. And it is our superpower. It brings us together. It unites us. It allows us to focus and combine our efforts down a certain track. So our superpower is that we tell stories. But my contention is that our Achilles heel is that we believe them. In other words, our stories become for us reality, capital R. Stories are a wonderful and important expression of our humanity, but they are a horrible foundation for our humanity. And anytime a story takes over the place of truth with a capital T, well, that's what you call dogma, where I start with my story and then try to fit everything else to fit into my story. When you're dogmatic, you're not coming from a humble place of human being saying, wow, I'm exploring this mystery of our existence. I have all these questions and I'm just setting out and like, here's one way to think about it. Or let's go on this adventure or that adventure. Or you're not doing that. You're saying, I know the truth, capital T. My story is the truth, and all who do not believe this are outside the realm of truth, because after all, I know the truth, right? My story is the truth, and so if you oppose that, I am at war with you in some way, and I will also tend to, come together around others who share my way of looking at things, so we break into tribes. And so dogma as a foundation is, I think, the root of most of our problem, the wars, everything. So to say that we're not going to do dogma is not the same thing as having a dogma. It is to recognize the danger of dogma. It helps for me to distinguish three levels of dogma. Everyone has stories they believe, right? Things that they think hold to be true. And so one level of dogma would be just personal and private. A second level would be evangelistic, where I'm trying to get you to buy into my dogma. And the third level would be militant, where I'm not just trying to get you by reason or words or argument to, hey, join my story. At this point, you're saying, you must join my story or you will die. You can think about the Crusaders forcing the infidels to be baptized and become Christians because, they're conquered. So now you're a Christian. That kind of dogma. So again, the levels would be private, kind of held to myself. Evangelistic, where I'm trying to get you to buy into my story. And militant, where I am like, no, yeah, you will, either you're in my story or I will kill you. As I've thought about what's going on and, like this white nationalist dogma, it occurred to me that to surrender to someone else's dogma, even if they come at me by force, is a form of living suicide. Because if I reject my own eyes, my own perception, my own heart, my own self, and just allow you to slap your version of the world, your story on me as truth, I have essentially erased myself. I have become just a character in your dogma. So I can't do that. Clearly can't do that. I literally would rather die than do that. I think that's true. I think I would die before I would do that. As an American, I have to reject this dogma of Christian nationalism because, as I said, it is neither Christian nor is it American. like Christianity, as I read Jesus, he's hard on dogmatists. He's has his harshest words for those who impose their dogma on others, and often, by the way, for power and money and those sorts of things, which is usually part of a dogmatic story. Jesus is not a dogmatist. He's a destroyer of dogma. And when I look at our nation, I see a country which is founded in the idea that we will not have a national religion, and that we will be I get it, we haven't always lived up to this, but in our ideal form, the idea is we're a melting pot, all kinds of races and tribes and tongues, that we come together, and we've in e pluribus unum, right? Out of many one. We come together and we mix this together. So the idea that Christianity is this rigid sort of, like, I don't know, evangelical Christianity of the 50s, I guess, or something, and that America is everybody believing that, that's not Christian or American to me. Now, do I sound intolerant as I say these things? Well, yes, I am intolerant of dogma. But to be intolerant of dogma is not dogma. It is the insistence that we not allow militant dogma to take over, because that ruins tolerance. We're back to the paradox of intolerance. It is not intolerant of any particular belief or dogma. It is intolerant of dogma by force. So if you want to make the case that white Christians came over in the Mayflower and that everyone in America was, believed the same evangelical version of Christianity, and that's how the nation was founded, and all the founding fathers were, good, evangelicals, and that's why they wrote it all, and we should all be that now. You're free to make that point. Have at it. At the evangelistic level. You see what I'm saying? So if you believe that and you want to convince me of that, have at it. But if you want to force that on me, that's a very different thing. At that point, I have to resist, because people need to be free to wonder, to go on adventures, to accept their lives, and to play together, and to do so with compassion and kindness. These are all values of facing up. I can have compassion even for a militant dogmatist. I can seek to be kind. I can try to break the spell of that dogma that holds them, but I must oppose. I must resist. I must be intolerant of that. Why? Because intolerance that is forced on others destroys the freedom of their humanity. Here's Popper's exact quote. If a society extends tolerance to those who are intolerant, it risks enabling the eventual dominance of intolerance, thereby undermining the very principle of tolerance. Tolerance is deeply American. In fact, I would say this is the greatness of our country. Whatever greatness there is, I think this is it. And I want to share two experiences where this really hit home to me. One was when I had been away in Argentina for a couple of weeks with my daughter, who was an exchange student there. had been in Argentina long enough to sort of get a feel for that culture, which is very like monoculture. Everyone there kind of looked the same. Everyone spoke the same language. It was not unfriendly. It was not a bad experience, but it was just, one note. And I remember getting on the airplane, sitting down, and we landed in a city where a whole bunch of people who were flying back to America were getting on the plane. And all of a sudden, coming down the aisle were all these different kinds of people, different races, a black person, an Asian person, an Indian person, someone, wearing the headscarves, and all this variety. And I literally teared up. And I think it was the first time that I ever looked at American culture sort of like with fresh eyes from the outside. And it just hit me, wow. I love this place. I love how it is so welcoming of all kinds of people. The second experience was when we moved up to Seattle. Seattle, if you haven't figured out, is very liberal. I mean, and I would say in some cases dogmatically liberal. Not in a good way. Dogmatically rigid liberal in the same way that maybe the most conservative town in the South could be dogmatically conservative. There are people, not a lot, but there are people up there who are rigid about like you have to agree with us on all these liberal points or whatever. But that's not the main thing I experienced. What really struck me about living up there was that, wait a minute, at that point I wasn't really a conservative evangelical, but I had friends who were a part of the group I was working with who went to conservative churches. No one cared. They had the freedom to be conservative. And then you have people, just all the way on the other edge of the spectrum. And what I experienced was that liberalism works, that this freedom, free to be you and me, all of that, it was working. Now, not perfectly. And yes, there was dogmatism on the left. There was pushback from the right. I had dogma strains of that. But overall, I just wish people who are so afraid of liberal Seattle and liberal Portland could go spend a little time up there and realize no one's trying to say that you can't believe your conservative Christian things and live by your conservative Christian values. I didn't sense anyone trying to stomp that out of me. Now, okay, I'm overstating that. There were people who tried to do that, but I would say they are just as wrong as the people on the other side. But in general, it was just sort of this freedom, and that sort of surprised me. Like, wow, I like this. I like this freedom because, again, to me, that's the American dream. That's worth celebrating. That's worth even fighting for. And I am sickened at what Trump is doing and what the Republicans are silently allowing right now. I am against it. I have participated in protests because at this point, this is not a privately held view that they're holding on to. It's not just evangelistic, trying to convince everybody that this story is the right story. It is militant. It is dogma by force. And if it wins, it will undermine the very principle of tolerance. Our way out of dogma, I believe, is not going to be anyone's story. It will be a new way to regard the story. And that is to hold our stories playfully, lightly, humbly, to share them, to say, let's try this story, that story, to give people as much freedom as possible to live their lives, to go on their own adventures, and to figure out how to do that together, but never from the standpoint of, we got to find the truth, capital T, the true story, and then force everyone to believe it, or even to convince everyone to believe it. We need to lighten up our grip on our superpower, our ability to tell stories, because again, our superpower is that we tell stories. Our Achilles heel is that we believe them.